welcome to Independent Presbyterian Church. We are so glad that you have joined us this morning and that you are going to get to hear Meredith Miller today. Meredith is a pastor and writer and parent with more than 20 years experience in children's ministry and faith formation. At the heart of her work is a passion for helping families and churches nurture a faith that is honest and thoughtful and rooted in love and strong enough to last. She holds a Master's of Divinity from Fuller Seminary and previously served as Curriculum Director for Children's Ministry at Willow Creek Community Church. She's also been closely involved with the work of the Fuller Youth Institute, contributing to research and conversations about how faith takes shape in the lives of young people. Since 2019, she served as co-pastor of Pomona Valley Church in California. She's the author of Woven and the newly released Wonder, which if you haven't gotten it yet, we hope that you will. Through her writing and teaching, she invites readers to approach Scripture with curiosity and openness, trusting that deep and lasting faith grows when we engage the biblical story with honesty and curiosity and wonder. We are so grateful that she has joined us here today. So please join me in warmly welcoming Meredith Miller.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I am so grateful and excited to be with you all. I'm going to move this because you all didn't fill the first two rows like all dutiful church people do. So I'm just going to come closer. I am especially looking forward to this morning because we are the folks who do both, many of us, probably some parenting and caregiving, but you are also do front and center work with other kiddos through faith communities, which is such an important and special space. And so it should be a real good time. This is going to work best if we're conversational together. So raise hands, jump in, let's chat, right? Like we just get to talk shop, which is a ton of fun. And so to kick us off, I would love to just ask, I'm tangled. I told you I can't be trusted with the mic. Okay. Simple question. What is the goal of kids and family ministry, but wrong answers only? To entertain them. Absolutely. Just get those families to church, to babysit them, to get their parents to church by what we do in the programming, so that they will give money in the offering. Let's get real about why we want them in church. Absolutely. Attendance. Keep the sanctuary quiet. Got to get rid of those distractions. Absolutely. To raise well-behaved children and to tell those children what we believe. Absolutely. They just need to listen to us say it. We say all the words. Yes. Any other contributions to our wrong answers only? These are good ones. Excellent. This probably won't surprise you. I feel like along the way, I've worked in a lot of really great churches. I also worked in a few that 100% this was how it worked. Where it was just as long as kids leave happy. The fun part of that was in the place where that was the most prominent. It just meant we had an entire ministry team that was cool, if all you care is that they leave happy and we know that doing good stuff for kids actually contributes to that, we're just going to do what we think is right. And it's still going to work. It's a win-win. I think a lot of the answers that trip up the most, though, beyond the wrong answers only, are the ones that are kind of tempting and almost, but not really. And I think those are especially challenging to navigate with constituents outside of vocational ministry, whether those are other colleagues on staff who maybe don't live as close to kids and young people's ministry, or maybe it's parents who come in and they're well, why aren't you doing this thing that we expect you to do? And I find those answers tend to float around two goals a lot of the time. This thing about information, that there is information related to our faith, and so isn't the goal that we're really teaching them that information. Now maybe you teach it creatively or you do what you need to do, but fundamentally, aren't we trying to get the stuff of faith into the minds and hearts of kids? And then I think the other one that often kind of leaves this pull relates to application. Aren't we trying to tell kids sort of how to live their faith? And I think that information side, it makes sense that it kind of pulls at us because there is kind of a lot to it. There's all these stories in scripture, there's all this doctrine that comes out of it, there's all these traditions that we believe are really meaningful, there's Christian practices that help create space for God, and that sort of feels, well, that is informational, right? And then this one I think is especially tempting because, of course, our faith is relevant even to children. Of course, our faith can be lived in meaningful ways by children. And so this idea of, oh, we'd love for them to live our faith gets, I think, a little bit sideways, because what ends up happening is it still ends up being adults telling kids rather than walking alongside them to discover it, right? Same with the information. It ends up being adults talking at kids rather than inviting kids into things. But I also kind of get why those two have like dominated the landscape for the last several decades. Because there's these really good impulses within them. There's these nuggets that are just true within them. So what I would love to remind us all of, and depending on how long you have been in this kind of work, in fact, I'm actually very curious about that. How many of you have been in kids ministry for like the last 3 years or less? Newer to it? Terrific. Oh, hello, we welcome. Okay, wait, so are any of you in your first year doing this in a vocational sort of way? Hi, it's the best. How many of you are like 3 to 6 years? Okay, how many of you are like 7 to 10? How many of you are over 10 years doing this? Okay, so yeah, we've been for a long stretch. Which means some of this is going to feel familiar to many of you. What happens for young people, and this is the stuff that comes from Fuller Youth Institute's Sticky Faith, which was the project I had the privilege of being a research assistant with and doing lit review for. This is also out of Christian Smith's soul searching stuff, and Kenda Creasy Dean's stuff out of Princeton. When we have these ministries that focus a ton on information and application in the ways I just mentioned, not in exploring the stuff of our faith and discovering how we do it, but in the more rigid sense. Kids learn these lists so well because adults are ready to tell them what goes on these lists. They have a really strong sense of what good Christians do, and they have a really clear sense of what good Christians do not do down the list, right? And I don't know a ton about Alabama, but I have a sense that this might feel familiar to y'all's culture. So I am going to have you get into groups of, let's go no more than 4. Introverts, I promise it's not a lot of talking. Small groups, I'm going to give you 3 minutes. Pick somebody who'd be willing to be your note taker. They can do it on paper. They can do it on a phone with a little notes app. It doesn't really matter, but you are going to make the lists. Now, it does not have to be that you are nominating things from your personal experience or things that you agree with. We just know what's in the water. We know how this kind of stuff goes. So, as a group, you would like to make the list. You would like as many ideas as you can possibly come up with in 3 minutes for what goes on the list of the things that the good Christians do and the good Christians do not do. Find some friends. Go. Okay, you got your lists? Whoever recorded them for you? Who's got bingo? Feel free to get up. If you can't see it, come on closer, come check. See? I go some places and they're like, don't do yoga. Who cares about that? I'm like, I'm telling y'all, some people care about the yoga. And others just care about the yoga pants. Yeah, it's a thing. It's a whole thing. Okay, but did any of you actually get one? Did you luck out on a line? Or are you like 4 out of 5? Or not in the right order? Oh, no official. Close, but no. When I get the chance to talk with parents, when we gather parents and caregivers tonight, we are going to play this same game. So we have these 2 things that are true as practitioners. One is fundamentally, What all that research from the early 2000s, early 2010s said is that kids think that their faith is a project in winning bingo. That because adults give them the lists, they walk away thinking this is what it is to be a good Christian. I win bingo. And that makes God happy. This is all they've got. And even before you had all these research themes starting to come out, you had like Dallas Willard. He has this great article, you can still find it through the website that hosts his work, called Spirituality Made Hard. Spirituality Made Hard is the title, so if you just go to dallaswillard.org, you can find it. But he was talking way early about this gospel of sin management, that Jesus came to help remind you to be more good and less bad. And kids largely end up thinking this is the deal, to just win their bingo. And parents and caregivers largely think being a good Christian parent is helping their kid win bingo. That it's just a matter of making sure they've got the right lists and that they're representing the right lists to their kids, and that that's how they are a good Christian family. And so on both fronts, from a kid's experience in their own faith and from a parent's experience trying to be a good Christian parent, you end up with the same outcome, which is exhaustion. It's just so tiring to always try to be more good and less bad. And then you also find with young people, one of the other big takeaways from this is a big part of why they end up disillusioned with faith. This is not a life-giving faith story. I won bingo. And in particular, when you add in the fact that what they believe about the bingo winning God is that if they win bingo, the prize is crisis prevention and happiness provision. Right? This is the moralistic therapeutic deism thing that we've been kind of trying to work through these last couple of decades. And yet, despite having all this research, collectively in kids ministry, it's fascinating how overdue we are to respond. Because if parents are honest, sometimes they kind of like that maybe their kids would just win bingo. They'd have such good kids that way, who behave just right, and they're well-mannered, and they're respectable, right? Or, if we're honest, sometimes we think, well, if the deal is that if I win, God keeps me happy, I actually think I could play that game pretty well. And that keeps the control with me, my choices, my actions, my behaviors. If I can avoid hardship through my own goodness, a number of people would probably take that bet, given especially how afraid we are of pain. And especially when kids have potentially not experienced lots of it, or when we aren't always paying attention to what kids are carrying, it's easy for them to then come in thinking, oh, I got this. And so this is, I think, what's really critical for us as we continue to think about the ministries that we get to shape and serve, is when we are not really intentional about our goal in ministry, and when we are not in constant conversation with our families about how they can be doing this, we all kind of end up trying to play bingo, and it's just exhausting. And so for the rest of our time, instead of talking about the goal of kids and family ministry as an information download, which we know it's not, we're thinking about orienting it around personal introduction. Because bingo God, with a lowercase g, is not very personal. Bingo God is like an observer, like keeping tally on things. And kids who are in a list management sort of faith don't really have a sense of a God who's near or personal or with them. And so there is this real need, if you're countering these systems, to think about how you consider, hey kiddo, I know this God and I'd love to introduce you. I want you to know what they're like. I actually think they're really lovely and trustworthy. So I'm going to help you introduce you to someone I actually know that I think could be someone that would be good for you to know. And in the same way that we're not filling up the lists, we're instead thinking about nurturing a friendship. Friendship is a category that's very concrete and accessible to our kids, and so it can be a really helpful on-ramp for what we're talking about. The idea of God who is our friend, who cares when we are sad, who is close to us, who wants to know about us. It's not the only thing God is, but it's certainly a category that kids can connect with pretty readily. And so what if instead we think about our goal being that we want to be with these kids, these awesome, very diverse kids that come to us each week as they get to know God so they can discover if God can be trusted. And that the ministry spaces we get to create help serve that goal of let's be with them and let's think about how they are getting to know God and we can help them get to know God, not so that they can fill up the lists right and not so that they can win bingo, but so that they can see, oh, this is a trustworthy God that's in here that I'm being introduced to. And I think one of the tricky parts, especially for our volunteers, is that adults know God's trustworthy, but kids are still learning it. And sometimes in ministry spaces, it can be challenging to have folks who are so sure that God is all these things that they are just really ready to talk at kids about it. And being mindful that, yeah, you can be as confident as anything about who God is, but kids don't know that yet. They just haven't had the time or the space or the experiences that bring these things we're so sure of to life for themselves. So, with that, right at the bottom of, any of you who are the paper worksheet people, last little line on the bottom about a biblical model. Theologically, I think that one of the important pieces is that God goes first, right? This is a biblical pattern that I don't necessarily think Christian family stuff talks about in the way that it could and should to help parents and caregivers, right? Parents and caregivers think they're supposed to do the bingo thing, that's what makes them good at this. But when you start to say, okay, but there is this model in Scripture of God going first to introduce himself to humanity or to individuals, and in that process, God always ends up showing more of who God is and what God's like and why God's trustworthy before God ever asks the people to respond back. And you could play this game through pretty much all the Bible, right? In creation, God creates, and here's humanity, and then all of the goodness of creation is God going first, and then it's here, tend to it and fill it up and steward it and make it creative and lovely, right? Maybe Abraham is a tiny, right, of not totally knowing who this God will be. Except they have this conversation about, I'm going to be with you, and I will guide you, and I will lead you, and there's this process of following along wherein Abraham is invited to get to know God and trust God, and then also kind of fails miserably in the sister-wife lie and so on. And then God introduces in the middle of the sister-wife lie that God is the God who's going to take Sarai's side, which is a very important thing about who God is. And the Exodus, and here God shows up, and these people have been in suffering for so long that when you read through it, you realize they don't even particularly know who God is anymore. Those are stories from great-great-grandpa about someone or other. And so the whole Exodus story, this contest between God and Pharaoh, is in part so that God can reintroduce himself to the Hebrews. To say, this is the kind of God I am. This is who I am, especially compared to Pharaoh, who's claiming to be God over everything. And out of that, you don't get the literal list of the 10 Commandments, right? But where it's well, yeah, but there are lists of how we're supposed to be and act. Yeah, after God goes through this whole saga of saving them, and the first line of the 10 Commandments is, I am Yahweh your God who brought you out of Egypt. And so, da-da-da-da. It's from the story, right? And you can play this over and over again to realize, all we're trying to do in ministry spaces is parallel the way God chooses to relate to us. Introduce first, respond second. Put those things in order. Instead of asking kids to obey a God they don't know and follow a God they haven't decided is trustworthy yet, right? We could play this game real fast. Think about the last time you did something simply because someone told you to. Right? We were just chatting about this before. I have Invisalign now because my dentist said your teeth will break if you don't get orthodontia. It's oh, fun. Yay, midlife. So find your thing, doctor, mechanic, dentist, okay? But then I'm going to add that you need to find something you did because you were told to and you didn't trust the person who was telling it to you. Can you find an example in there that you did it, but you didn't trust the person telling you to? And my guess is at this point it becomes either harder to find an example or you realize that you did it because of fear. It's usually the only reason we do something that we're told to do without trusting the person who told us to. And I think if we're honest, there's a lot that has come out about teaching kids what the faith is that's rooted in fear instead of love. And that becomes our responsibility as ministers of a gospel of good news and grace in Jesus, to fight hard for kids to meet Jesus in love and not fear. So, some thoughts for us on the back. I've got 4 words that relate to a lot of these ministry spaces and these kind of key things we do. Before we turn the corner, actually, let me go back, sorry. Thoughts, questions, anything we can talk about more before we go on? Because we got... Oh, secret common option number 3 was the entertainment one. Yes, sorry. I got new handouts and my lovely graphic designer laid them out and then I forgot. So sorry about that. It's the entertainment one, right? That we're just gonna keep them happy so that the money keeps coming in. That was a real meeting I had once with someone at Willow that said, yeah, but isn't the point that the kids should want to drag their parents to church so that their parents will be formed in faith, and then the parents being formed in faith will nurture their kids? And it was like, oh, what a small, sad way to think about this. And what a dishonoring way of how kids actually meet God for themselves. But that was, yeah, isn't that the point? Yes, thank you. Sorry about that. Anything else? All right, terrific. While we're at it, how many of you mainly serve with kids under 5? Okay, how many of you are like the elementary aged? Do any of you oversee birth through elementary? Okay. Are any of you youth folks? Okay, terrific. Cool. All right. Youth people, the stuff we're about to talk about, it's still true. It's tone, right? It's honoring that they're 15, not 5. But it's not, the themes are the same. And all of this is what's kind of cool and fun, is the research is largely on adolescents and young adults because it's much easier to get good studies. It's very hard to study children under 13. We're actually like turning the corner on that at Fuller Youth Institute right now. And it's fascinating, 1, because you need a bunch of permissions, 2, because of bot hacking research methodology. So we've actually had to like data dump stuff where we couldn't verify that they were actual human children, which does mean, incidentally, for those of you who kind of find it interesting to look at like research on families, and they're like, we did a survey of 40,000 families in the US. It is now time to start being suspicious that those were actual human people. Not that their research is wrong, but like a major report just came out from a think tank a couple weeks ago about like family health. And the survey size was so massive, and the survey intake was digital. And it's like, oh, now we don't. They can have bots pretend to be children. They can slow down when they actually answer. They can misspell. So like how we just start to get good research insights is shifting. It doesn't mean it's all bogus. It just means like, oh, like who we're listening to help us, get the pulse on this is just kind of changing. So anyway, as an aside for those of us who are in that space. All right, some themes I have found helpful in these last handful of years. When it comes to scripture, we think about exploration. This is instead of information, instead of application, that the idea is that we are pursuing exploration. That we are thinking about how God's a character in the story. It's not just that we're looking at the human to tell us what they did right or wrong so that we can tell kids to go be like that human or learn from that human, and then that ends up just living on the list. Instead, we're saying, okay, God's this character in a story, and so we're looking at what do we notice about who God is or what God's like. I have started in the last handful of years making this a tradition in our ministry with our kids. This question, exactly like this, gets asked every week at the end of the story. And so we always say every Bible story tells us at least one something about God, usually lots of somethings. I'd really love to know, what'd you notice about who God is or what God's like this time? And that's one of our traditions for a couple of reasons. 1, it helps point to God in the story as a practice. 2, it helps kids learn that we go around and around the Bible, and yeah, they have heard that story before sometimes. That's okay. Part of what the Bible does is God speaks new ways through ancient stories, and the more kids learn how to do it, as opposed to, I've learned this one already, right? That's part of why they say, I know this one. Because they're betraying that they think the point is information, and who can blame them? They're 7. That's not on them. That's on us to say, yeah, you have. So I really want to know this time. Like, what was your favorite part this time? Or, yeah, you have. So I want you to pretend you've never heard it before, and instead you were there watching it happen for the very first time. Would this have been what you have thought or not? Right? And so we keep inviting them into how do we keep exploring Scripture. And part of that, and if you've read Woven, this will not be new to you, is to think about practicing what I call God-centered storytelling. This was the biggest single shift. Michael and I worked together at Willow. I knew this because I can't not talk about and give you credit with this. We worked together at Willow. We did this at Willow. This is part of how I know this works, because if you put 18,000 kids on a weekend from an hour of around Chicagoland whose families are either deeply churchy or they come twice a year and it still works, I feel like we're onto something promising. And part of this was that we told stories and we always picked one something about God that would be the main point of the story. In other words, the point of the story was never the action a kid was supposed to take because they learned the story. It was always something that we hoped they noticed about God in the story, right? And it's just fundamentally like, who's our hero? Are our humans the hero because they were obedient or brave and so on? Or is God the hero because God is going to be God even when the humans absolutely bungle the thing? Right? So Abraham and the sister wife lie. This is where we're supposed to learn that we do not lie. Do not lie like Abraham lied, or someone in your family might get kidnapped by an emperor. Versus, God saw Sarah victimized, and God took her side to save her and rescue her. Do you have have you ever noticed how sometimes people with power hurt people who have less power, kiddo? Are your parents telling you anything about the news? Like, what is it like to believe that God will come and help people who get hurt because somebody else used their power wrong? Does God always do that? What do you think, if we love God and trust God, are we invited to be part of that with God? All these things come from here, yeah? Would someone like to nominate another story for us that often shows up in our curriculum? David. Which part of David do we want to do? Okay. So, we do David and Goliath, and David is brave, and he stands up for God, and woohoo, right? So, go stand up for God and fight the Goliaths in your life, child who doesn't actually have metaphorical and abstract thinking yet. Versus David saying, God was with me when I fought a lion and a bear, and I believe God will be with me now. And we're saying, hey, God is with us in hard things. And does that feel easy or hard for you to believe, or why, right? Or God will help us, right? I come before you in the name of Yahweh, God of Israel, who will help me defeat you. God helps us in hard things. But this is also what opens up doing David and Bathsheba. Okay, maybe not for young kids, because you still actually have the plot of the story. But once a human's just a human, then you can say, he messed up right, left, and sideways. And you can paraphrase that to the age-appropriate level of the kids who can do it, but probably by 4th grade and up. And in high school, you've got some themes. You've got power, you've got consent, you've got gender roles, right? Like, you've got all kinds of things where it's like, he just messed this up right, left, and sideways in really terrible ways. And then you can talk about grace is bigger than any mistake. Like, it's actually bigger than any mistake. And that's part of what Nathan coming to David and him being willing to receive that means. Not because he was so heroic in his repentance, but because God can bring us people who will speak truth and create space for us to be honest. We never have to be afraid of being honest with God, because Jesus is actually big, like grace is actually bigger than any mistake. It's a whole different thing than, how did veggies do it? It's jealousy. Don't be jealous. David and the rubber ducky, right? I don't think I actually ever saw it. I think I only ever saw the cover. That's not a very inspiring takeaway from David and Bathsheba. But that changes what we do with Scripture because our goal is different, right? Okay. When it comes to kids, our guiding word is to invite them to respond. This is instead of application. Instead of us as adults knowing what we hope a kid will think or do next. And also, have you noticed how many times in the curriculum it's like, tomorrow at school? Like how quickly their application is meant to be like immediate. Tomorrow. This is when instead it's like, okay, if God is whatever you've sort of pointed out, then what? So what? What do I think about that? How do I feel about that? How would I like to talk with God about that? What comes next for me in that? And so there's all these different options for how a kid could respond, right? They might come in and be like, I just need to ask some things about this story because it was weird, right? They might come in being like, the feelings could be any of the feelings, right? If I tell you God is with you, how does that make you feel? And maybe I need to give you some time to like find your feelings, or maybe I need to give you a chart with some feelings on them that you can point to, right? But how does that make you feel, kiddo? This is also the space where we sometimes try things out. Hey, I'd love to teach you this Lectio Divina thing. I'm going to give you a verse. Let's try this together. Examine for kids can be really fun. You just might change the questions, right? A formal examine has kind of a flow, and maybe for kids it's just, I would love for you to think about a time that you felt happy and a time that you felt alone and what you hope God will be for you, right? As you think about yesterday or whatever, and you can frame it out in a new way. My kids love a labyrinth. This was a COVID discovery, because there are 2 in our town that are outside and no one was there. And it kind of felt playground-ish when our parks were closed. And so, it's like a maze. It's so cool. But the idea of what a labyrinth invites us into, of like, I don't have to think where I'm going when my body can be engaged. So even like the finger labyrinths, some of us familiar with the finger labyrinths? Is this new to some of you? Okay. If it's new, they make them beautifully. There's like clay ones, but you can do like a printout version of it. And then my favorite is you get the wiki sticks. Do we know wiki sticks? If you don't know wiki sticks, the wax bendy ones, and they stick to the paper. So kids can put their wiki sticks on the line of the labyrinth and it'll create the groove so that they don't have to look at their paper to follow the pattern. And it's relatively cost effective. But this idea of like, I could get my body in, and on the way in, we're gonna tell God things that have been kind of like hard, sad, or scary for us. And in the middle, we're gonna remember that God is with us and God is our help. And on the way out, we're gonna say, we're gonna ask God for what we need about those things. Or whatever you do, you can kind of make it up. Labyrinths are very versatile, which is very fun. And then these last 2 kind of live like this thing here. Who do you know that needs to know? This is a great question for inviting some sort of active response without putting it on the list. Okay, so God is bigger than any mistake. Do you know anyone who needs to know that's true? That God's bigger than any mistake? And you'll hear some really great stories from their life out of that. And then sometimes there's something that it's like, do you feel like God might be asking you to do anything to help with that? Send a note, draw a picture, do a card. But sometimes it's just that they want to share. This is all the kind of stuff that flows out of Respond. Curriculum-wise, we're not doing all of this every single time we gather. We're picking like one. This is facilitated. I think this sometimes is the myth about Response, is that like because it's meant to be adaptable and personal, then like it feels like I don't know how to do all of this every time we gather. This is still facilitated. You pick one type of response pathway that you think would really be well suited to the stories or your kids at the time. Or potentially you make stations and they can choose within them. Especially the older they get, the more you can put like, hey, here's 3. And they can kind of rotate. But it's not that you're trying to do like all of this all the time. It's like a menu. You pick. All right, thoughts so far? Questions? Okay, great. On we go. Guiding word for leaders is actually guides as opposed to gurus. Our volunteers really want to do well when they are with kids. They are there because they care about our kids and their faith. If they don't know how to be a successful, effective leader, they will default to teacher type models because that is the thing that is most like familiar to them or measurable to them. Right? Part of how we got where we did with sort of a hyper application model dominating the landscape is that a volunteer can check in the following week on whether the kid did the thing from the week before. Never mind that now our kids do not come weekly, which feels like an important part of this, right? Part of the upside of doing exploration and response is kids who haven't been there in a long time or kids who are new can come into that way more easily than they can in things that are series that have to be like you had to have been here the week before to get it. If you say, hey, this is what God's like and what do you think? Almost every kid in the room, if you create safety, they can answer that. If you base it on, hey, what was the story today and what did we learn? You've already set it up that only the kids who either are more familiar with the Bible or who are wired to learn in the ways that you taught are the only ones who can be successful. So leaders understanding that they are guides alongside that they are kind of helping navigate with kids, that they're following what kids are into within reason, right? Like, I understand that our volunteers, when the tangent goes really far afield, they're like, I don't know what to do. All they wanted to do was talk about Pokemon and say 6-7. But there is something about like following their lead where like if kids get on like a silly tangent in a story, then like, okay, can we chase that silly thing and like fold it back into the story instead of like, that's not what's going on, you know? If they ask a random question that doesn't seem to be about the story, but it's a good question. Okay, yeah, hold on, we'll time out from the story. I want to, like, we should talk about this. This is great. And they're mindful of like their literal volume of words compared to how many words came from the children. Like, how much did you talk? How much did they talk? If they're looking for metrics of success, like give them a rough ratio of like, hey, this is probably one of those times that you only need to be talking like half the time at the most, and the rest should be them. Or sometimes it might be harder where you're like, hey, this time it might feel like they're not going to talk as much, and you're going to actually have to be like uncomfortable with silence so they can think. But we need that, so you just count to 10. But giving them that sense of like, how does this feel when I do this well? Because what they're used to is I got through the lesson on the paper, therefore we did well. Or we reviewed the content of the story and they said back to me that they learned the content of the story. Or we checked in on the application activity and I know what kind of actions I'm watching for from them. And those make sense because they're concrete. They're just not as helpful as other ones. And then the last one would be a guiding word for parents and caregivers. When we talk with them, when we talk to them tonight, we're going to be talking a lot about these 4 themes that come out of faith formation research. And what they really need from us in church spaces is to also be mindful of them. I'll unpack them in just a sec. And think about how our faith communities become like an echo of that in the lives of their kids. But also how our faith communities are excited for families to do something unique. Are we in our churches accidentally sending the message that they really are supposed to get a bingo, only we filled up the bingo card with stuff that our church has prioritized for them? Like weekly attendance, or Wednesday night program enrollment, or whatever memory verse things that we've had. You know, we had the memory verse booklets and the stickers in the store growing up, and I was very good at memorizing verses, so I had a grand old time. But like kids who don't come and don't have the thing and don't know the verses or can't learn them that way. But we've sometimes accidentally put squares on the bingo card that the parents think that they're supposed to be ticking off, right? Versus when we think about woven faith, one of its big features is uniqueness. I have sadly had to learn so much about spiders in the last 5 years because of woven, including when you catch a spider web. So orb weavers make those pretty symmetrical ones, like on the cover of Woven. Only 10% of spiders are orb weavers. The other 90% don't make orb webs. In fact, they actually can't. They are not wired up to make an orb web, even if they wanted to. They have to make another shape of web that is within them because of the spider that they are and the place they call home and the environment they live in that needs to nurture them. 90% of spiders do something else. They make funnel webs that like go in the little thing and then you live at the bottom of them. Or there's one that is this, jumping spiders, their webs have doors. They like weave a door and at night they go into the little like cavity they've created and it comes down and closes them in. I learned this, by the way, because a parent told me because they have pet jumping spiders in their home by choice, right? And then, of course, like, I still love that there's the web called a tangle web, and it looks like this. And that is actually not a mess. It is totally doing its job. It is providing safety and nourishment for this spider. And our families need to understand that they are free to follow Jesus in totally unique ways that don't have to look like any other family in our community. And the more they feel pressure to make sure they're on point to look like every other respectable church-going family in your community, the less they're actually probably feeling like they can do what their kid needs when it comes to their own part of being with their kids as they get to know God and discover God can be trusted. And so us being mindful of nurturing for families a culture of freedom and uniqueness is a real gift to them. But in that process, there is also this other reality that for a lot of our adults, you can talk this through, but they are still not so sure God can be trusted. Because to whatever degree we are practitioners trying to create something new for kids, and a lot of our churches might actually be like kind of doing this in really nice, lovely, beautiful ways, chances are a like parenting aged person raised in church spaces, if they were raised in church spaces, oh man, they hit that bingo stuff hard, right? The focus on the family, Dobson and Company, obedience model was so prevalent that your parents also think they're supposed to win bingo, and one of their squares is raise good kids. And they are so scared of getting it wrong. And so part of the gift that we offer in our communities is the chance for parents to be safe in their own process of getting to know God. And if it's a web of faith, and if part of what makes it strong is who God is, there might be some places where adults need to know that the breakage was actually normal and necessary, not failure. Right? Spiderwebs break all the time. Bird sticks, me wanting it out of my way. And then they just tend to that breakage, but the whole thing is not ruined. And the spider didn't fail. It's just normal. And for parents and caregivers to know within their own faith that when there's been breakage, because who they thought God was is not what they've experienced, or how they thought the Bible worked. My goodness, the ones that are stuck because they were told the Bible's only trustworthy because it's literal. And then they find your communities and they're like, y'all talk about genre and context a lot. I don't know how that goes and what that means. Or they had like faith practices that was like, this is what good Christians do, right? They have quiet times. I came from quiet times. We have quiet times. But then if those don't work, all those places of breakage is like, well, it's normal. It's part of it. You just tend to it. You reweave something new in because you either get to know God in a new way again, or you find some fresh practices that are very life-giving, or you learn new stuff about the Bible and it reweaves. Meanwhile, the other parts of your faith that you kind of have to hold on to, the things about God you still know are true, or the things that still work for you, those hold on to you, right? If a spider actually had to start from scratch every time there was damage to the web, they'd die. They cannot sustain the energy it would take to do the whole thing from zero every single time. So they don't. They live off of what holds on to them while they tend to what's broken. So many of the parents in your community need to realize that they haven't failed and that God is still holding on to them and that they don't have to start from nothing and that you are so honored to be with them as they figure out how to reweave something. So, I'm going to stop there before we talk about some potential next step ideas, just in case you're like, I really need to know what I do with this. So, just for those who are wired that way, thoughts, questions, what can we talk about more? Okay, before we pivot to ideas, with those 4 things on the back, I would love to just give you a couple of minutes. And if you came with colleagues, team up. But I'd love to give you a couple minutes to just think through, like, if you are looking at, we do this really well, we have some space to grow, we actually really haven't thought about this one much. Like, how would you think about each of these 4 things? Because how your church does this gets to be really unique, but those kind of guiding themes. So if you were just going to give yourself a, we are really doing this quite well, go us. Or like a, we are on the right track, or a, oh, we need to pay some attention to this. What would you do for each of the 4? So I'm going to give you a couple minutes with that. If you're on your own and you just want to think, that's cool. If you came with a colleague, feel free to talk. All right, now what can we talk about more? Questions, thoughts? How do you, not that I always have all the answers, but please, thank you.
So as we're like talking about like helping cultivate guys, and I know that I'm guessing this is universal to most churches that struggle to get actual volunteers
Yeah.
in the room, safe ratio, all this stuff.
Yes.
Constant concern. And what it creates then is this feeling like you're plugging holes with volunteers
Yeah.
instead of cultivating a group of people that are in love with God and want to tell this great, like want to be a part of like storytelling, story exploring.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you start to
I will repeat it for us this first time, and then
How
we'll.
do you start to move culture towards
Yeah.
deeper relationships? Because I do think part of our problem
is that our adults are in this gap
Yes.
space, and so they are list makers, and
Yeah.
so they will do their duty for what they feel like they should have to do
Yeah.
to say yes, or because they feel uncomfortable when we ask them, but not because they are really moved by the thought of exploring a story with children, and
Yeah.
that's really meaningful.
Yes. And the beginning of the question, if you were near the back and didn't hear, was that when we're trying to think about guides, not gurus, but the practical reality is you have safety ratios, and you have parents who sometimes this is on their own checklist. I have to go volunteer, but they're not necessarily eager or excited. And so recognizing like that is a reality of like, okay, we'd love to foster this. We also just have to like fill a safe roster on a Sunday, and that is a very real thing. And part of it is, I mean, I think we know this, like culture shaping is slow work. And so there is something that we have to be patient with for our own selves of realizing that you're talking about the whole culture of how your church raises young people. What you do on a Sunday morning is a programmatic response to the culture you're trying to create of how you raise young people, which is part of why we just spent the time we did on these bigger things, not on curriculum design and like small group facilitation tools. Those are important, but part of it is having a critical mass of your people who understand the culture of what does it mean like at our church, how are we trying to raise young people well? And what are we looking for? Part of this, like, so I'll do the like hard part first and then maybe some other thoughts that come along with it. I don't think the needle moves on this without your senior leaders' significant support. Significant support. I don't think the needle moves on this without your senior leadership's significant support. So that can look a lot of ways, but like how you are a church raising young people needs to be a collective endeavor of which your ministry is playing a key role. And if you don't have like regular, we say the words about young people from the platform, stage, lectern, it will be much slower. So depending on where you come from and what things are like right now, that is just, I just haven't seen it done. When it comes to the people you do have, though, a lot of times you have folks who are willing who just don't know. So as much as asking for time on the calendar is an ask, getting them physically in the room, not on Zoom, and I say this as someone who pastors a church that's on Zoom most of the time, but like physically in a room with some snacks, some good beverages, to be able to say like, hey, I want an hour because I want you to hear what we're trying to do and make. You will win people over when it's not a training, it's not a skills training. It's a where are we trying to go together to honor kids and giving them a version of this that is for them as practitioners, but like, hey, I don't know if y'all know, there's like research on this stuff and it like really messes with kids. And like, when we say we want to do these things on a Sunday, this is why, right? And even naming some of the things that are squishy and weird about serving when you do this model of like, I know it can feel real weird when you're like, I don't know what I'm like doing with the lesson in the same way. What we're doing is cultivating conversations where kids know that their thoughts matter. And that is like the most important thing you can do. So you're starting to not just say this is where we think it'd be great for kids, but also this is why you're vital. And to start to see that idea of how would I measure success as a volunteer in that. And when that feels not so hard, of like, here's what's great, you don't have to have the right answer. Because when a kid asks a great question you don't know, you go, man, that's a great question, I have no idea. Wow. And then the kid feels smart because they stumped you. So that's great for you as a volunteer. Not everyone is going to come right along, but there is something about they do what they do because they don't know alternatively. And so grabbing your folks you do have to be like, this stuff is like the coolest. It's so fun and what you do matters so much. And we just wanted to make sure you really understood why. So that piece is part of it. Making your curriculum easy to win. So if you buy and modify a box kit, if you write your own stuff, like just literally looking at that sheet and being like, is this easy to do, but it still does good stuff? This is why they pay you the big bucks. Like, this is why I fully script curriculum. Read these words with animation. Partially because I'm trying to lower your prep, partially because I will not give up the fact that you haven't prepped and therefore the kids don't get a good story, right? And so we go full script. Can they go their own direction? Of course they can. Hey, make it your own, but like also just like, but do read all of it, right? These are our questions. Try to minimize going rogue, but part of that is giving them curriculum they can really do well. So even if you're just modifying your stuff, making sure your template feels clear. If you are prep dependent, that's a really great idea. They won't do it. And this is like, sometimes it's just easier to be honest about what they will or won't do and then try to work with that as best you can and accept some of the limitations about like, so if my volunteers do show up cold, how do I still give kids what they deserve? Okay, well, maybe I can write to that a little bit, or I can give some tools, or we can, or maybe I can facilitate, or some of my more committed folks can facilitate, and then I can turn them into groups in the room of like, I'm gonna ask the right question, and then I'm just gonna release them into little pods to talk about it. Because if I give that leader a sheet, they're gonna go like this the whole time because they don't actually pay attention. So we can try to help adapt, but fighting for leaders to prep, come half an hour early, it's a heavy lift. It doesn't mean it's not worth it depending on your culture and context, but sometimes it's, I think, having to be honest about the limitation and then what's the best option within it, right? It's the same as fighting for families to come weekly. They are not gonna come weekly. That is never gonna change back. Like, that is not a cultural thing that will ever shift again. Your families will come once to twice a month and they will think they are incredibly connected to your church. And then they'll say, my kid doesn't really wanna go and I don't know why. It's like, because they have no friends. Because friendship takes reps, right? And so there we are. And then I think just that, like, so this is the weird thing with volunteers too. If you make it too easy, they don't think it matters if they're there or not. And so experimenting in your context and culture for the sweet spot of an ask that's meaningful, where they can see that it matters that they were there. Because as soon as it becomes, oh, it's just so easy, you just have to come on and we've got everything all taken care of for you, we just need you, and we start trying to lower the threshold because when it feels too hard, we end up short, and then they show up and they're like, but you didn't need me. Like, a safety ratio is an incredibly uninspiring reason to come hang out with your kids, right? This is actually also why, like, personal opinion. This is why I don't like video curriculum. Video curriculum is not fun for a volunteer. It's easy. Kids pay attention to videos. It also doesn't allow the chance to interrupt, hear what a kid thought, talk to them about it. Debriefing a video is a much harder conversation for a volunteer than interrupting a human storyteller and talking about what's going on. Your conversational level drops when kids go from video to group compared to human storyteller and interruption. Maybe it's not a never for you, but it is worth considering if the video, which largely was developed strategically to entertain in the 90s when high-resourced megachurches could compete with Disney with what they did. Large churches didn't know what to do with crowd control and ratios, so they put all of the kids in a room and they entertained them from the stage. North Point used to readily admit that the reason they put K to 5 in one room, even though they pretended it was so the older kids could be leaders to the younger kids by how they modeled faith, and that's why they sat up front. Do you guys remember this? North Point used to put K to 5th in one room, 5th grade sat in the front, and then it went younger to the back. And they had this whole song and dance about how it was because those 5th graders were just modeling worship for the younger kids and inspiring, and then you get them in closed door rooms and they'd be like, we don't have enough volunteers. If we run it from the stage, we can keep them all happy. Put them all in a room and you're happy. And then videos became, over time, the stopgap for low ratio. That at least we know that they've heard a quality story. That might still be true, that a video teaching a story well is better than maybe what's available. It doesn't mean it's not a concern at times. But nobody made videos because it's how kids learn best. Nobody made videos because it's actually what disciples them best. They were solving other practical problems with video curriculum. In my bubble of opinion. Feel free to continue, but I'm just gonna say it for now. Yeah, it is an ongoing challenge, 100%. What else? Yes. Oh, wait, pass the mic, because then everyone can hear just in case. Yes.
How do you keep God as hero from being just the quick, Jesus is the answer? Where, I guess I'm especially thinking of people swimming in moral therapeutic deism.
Yeah.
Where's space for lament, for mourning, for pain, and not to just quickly jump to God as the answer?
Yeah. One of the nice things is you can tell harder stories when the people don't have to be heroes. And so then those stories can have more dynamic emotions, right? You can have fear and you can have sadness and you can have doubt, right? This is where like the exile stories become really interesting because it's like, well, at the beginning of our story, it seems that God has gone because why else are we not at home? So even though our overarching theme is we're going to find God in the story, when I tell it to a kid in the moment, it's like, oh yeah, we got no God. How else do you explain being in Babylon? And have you ever felt like God's nowhere to be found? And what do we do with that? And even being able to do like Psalms of lament as, in a way, this person's like praying to the God they're not really sure is showing up, the God that they think is failing at their job, and being able to give kids language around part of this process is we're pointing to God and we're bringing all of ourselves in that. And sometimes that's probably, more like third grade and up. You're up to second graders, so you're just doing lots of stories across the range. But when we say God's hero, it doesn't always have to mean that God fixed it or made everything okay. It's more that we're saying God's really in the overarching theme. The point is for us to be noticing God along the way way more than it is for us to be learning from the people. But I think on-ramping with shared experience or shared emotions to the people, especially the hard ones, helps with, well, we are both, us and these people in the Bible, trying to figure out what gives God. Because God seems far, God seems absent, God hasn't come through, and then what? Even like pointing out how rare the miracle stories are, where it's like, well, we love those stories. Also, they're in there because they didn't happen all that much. So all the in-between, like, usually we tell miracle stories as, hooray, Jesus fixed it. But like, they get older and you can be like, also, did you know, one of the reasons we have these is to be encouraging because a lot of times it doesn't feel like that happens. And it's meant to give us hope for all the times it doesn't experience. And so you can open that up. Do you ever feel that way too? Like those kinds of questions. And those questions also, to your point, they create safety for kids on what they're actually feeling instead of feeling like, oh, something's wrong with me, that you're telling me God's this way and I don't feel like that's true. There's a lot of that, like, does this feel true to you or not, that I think can be really helpful to kids. Yeah, that's a great question. Other thoughts? Okay, some potential things that you could keep in mind as you're thinking about how you do stuff. One would be you could walk through a typical hour from a kid's perspective. I mean, literally at times be like where your kid walks into the room and make yourself this tall and look at what your space looks like if you're this tall instead of when you're the adult, right? Just to walk through and be able to ask, like, what does your space, what does your culture say to kids, sort of implicitly, right? As you block a typical ministry hour, to be able to ask, like, okay, yes, it does functional things for ministry. Also, what message does this part of our time send about who God is or what God's like? So this would be like if kids go from free play to lesson, how does somebody invite them to shut down what they've been doing and come join the group? Because if it's time to clean up and put things away, boys and girls, you're actually saying something about God in that than having just any more cheerful ritual of like, hey, we're cleaning up. Hey, we're heading into a story. That's invitational. God is inviting when we have cheerful transitions from one activity to the next. And it says something about God wanting them to behave when our transitions from one activity to the next are like, let's do it right. So just having that in mind of just looking through the flow of the hour and saying, okay, by accident, what does this say and send? For volunteers, they will need practice. Like this whole idea of we're exploring together, they will need practice where they literally have to try saying aloud some of these like open-ended questions with no right or wrong. Like on a story you've done, being able to say, okay, we did this one recently, you grown up, I would love for you to imagine you're in the story and what would you be thinking or feeling? it is surprising to me, but also not surprising to me, that when we do this shift between God-centered storytelling and human-centered storytelling in this kind of setting, you'll ask adults like, we'll do David and Goliath a lot. And then we get through all the good things that David is supposed to be, heroic and all those good things. And then you go, okay, what about if you flip it and you say, God's our main character and we're looking for what God's like, and the room will go quiet. A room of parents who've done church forever, they don't know how. They can't hear it. And so your leaders will need that practice of like, hey, real fast, we want kids noticing what God's like. So like, let's all just brainstorm together real quick. What are some things we noticed? Yeah, kids might bring that stuff up or something else. That's our goal today, is to invite kids to name that for themselves as they finish through the story. But if they've always heard it the other way, even when you say we'd like to do it this way, they don't know how it feels. So they'll need that practice. And they will need, and we've mentioned this already, they'll need you to help them know that they did it well. What are they looking for? What are they listening for? Did kids talk? Did kids share opinions? Was it a good conversation? Does it feel like kids were, safe to share something? Sometimes you can point to like one thing. Like today in this lesson, we want to give kids the chance to say whether or not they think God is actually real, because we say it all the time. So we are going to tell them, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, and this God who saves. But our real question is, so is God actually real and going to show up? And we want it to be safe for a kid to say, I'm not sure. That's our goal today with this story, is for the kids who don't think it's true to be allowed to say it out loud. And when they do, leaders, you're going to say, yeah, it is a really hard thing. I'm so glad you told me that's how you feel about it. And I'm so glad I get to be with you as we keep working that through together. Right? So you're queuing up, if we created that safety, that is what we wanted to do with this story today, right? And they will appreciate and they need a little bit of what does that sound like. Okay. Kids, looking through your lessons to add kid questions with no right or wrong answer. Right? This is where we exchange review questions for response questions. If we storytell well, we don't need review. Tell the story better and then invite them to respond. What would you be thinking or feeling? Is this easy or hard for you to believe? What would you like to say to God about now? What's a question you have after hearing today's story? They have no right or wrong answer, and your volunteers knowing when a question has no right or wrong answer, tell the kids that's the case, because they are so primed from school to think that there's a secret hidden right answer. So giving your volunteers or putting in the script of your curriculum, I have some questions for you all, and they have no right or wrong answer. I just really want to hear what you think. And it's in the script of the lesson to name overtly that there isn't a right or wrong answer. And then there's the questions, because otherwise, even by accident, sometimes adults communicate that there actually is one. What would you be thinking or feeling right now that is definitely that Jesus is absolutely going to come through and do it for you? And then the kid's like, I would be thinking that Jesus is going to come through and do it for us. Would you though? Right? So fostering that no right or wrong answer is probably the single simplest shift in curriculum that can really help them. Last thought is for families. One would be to revisit whatever you send home to them, however that happens, and just look at how does our communication to families send a message about what God's like and what God thinks of them and in their task. I know that's kind of a strange sort of question, but this idea of if all it ever is asking them to come do stuff for you, if all it ever is asking them to review the content you taught, how does it sort of invite them in ways that it's you're a family trying to figure out how to love and follow God in everyday ways. And just being thoughtful about what messages your church is sending about what it means to be a successful family of faith. How are you helping them know it can look different and flexible? And so that might be as simple as you could talk about the lesson questions and you just shift the phrase from when you get in the car, talk about these questions to sometime this week, if you want to pick up on the lesson, you might ask something and putting flexible phrasing as opposed to ask your kid this question on the car ride home. Well, sometimes the kid is burnt out because your environment is incredibly sensory stimulating and they just need the car to go chill. And now the parent has failed 10 minutes after church because you said ask this question in the car when you could have said, hey, here's one question you might ask this week at some point when it comes up, right? Also, if you do send emails home to families and if you can make the switch to sending them on the Thursday before the weekend, so that it's ahead of time what story you'll be telling. You will buy so much trust. Because another part of families having their own baggage from all this is that they're terrified you're going to scar their kids with what stories you tell them and the content you present. And so if you lead on the front end with, hey, this week, this is what's coming, so that if they have questions or problems, you can even write that. If you ever have any concerns about how we storytell or what your kids are going to hear, please let us know. But if you have that ahead of time, so that they feel that is like the tiniest gesture towards partnership that is like really fun. Plus by Sunday in the middle of church is when my principal has scheduled the digital newsletter to come to my phone. I'm like, please help me, please, why? Why is it Sunday at 10 a.m.? Like, I don't want to be thinking about this, Sunday at 10 a.m., yeah. So, small thing. Those are take it or leave it. But if it feels like, oh, how could we just kind of keep poking at this within our own context? Those are some thoughts. Okay. I don't have a closing slide, so it's just going to stay on this lovely mama cuddling up with her kid. That is not at all a stock photo. We have about 10 minutes. We can also go longer, and if you have to head out because you need to get on to other things in your day, do feel free. What else can we talk about?
Do you have a curriculum that you love?
I write my own. I write my own, and I want you to too. I know why it's hard. So if I had to buy a box kit right now, I would be looking at Shine from the Mennonites. They have lots and lots of stories, and the theology of the Mennonites is just a really neat tradition. So I'd be looking at them. I would maybe be looking at Grow from stuff you can use only because it's very affordable and it comes editable. So it's not necessarily, depending on our group, like totally a fit necessarily. But there is something about, if you're gonna modify anyway, not sinking your whole budget into where you're starting from. And then, I don't know, does anybody in the room love their curriculum? If you have, to the training question, Godly Play is beautiful. It is very committed for volunteers. They have to really be in and they have to be well trained. Godly Play from the Episcopals. It is a Montessori model and it's really exploratory, but it is high training. So I always hesitate to offer it because
It has some interesting parts that parents,
yes.
in my experience,
Yeah.
push back on, like, you can't come in the room because there's a threshold.
Yeah.
There's some quirky parts.
It's quirky. It's quirky. Yeah. And they kind of know that about themselves, but like,
That's smart.
yeah, they really like their model. It's not very adaptable.
But the questions are.
The questions, this is the thing. And their fundamental posture of like slow, methodical storytelling is kind of neat. So I'd probably go reading about them and then like fold it into what I was doing. Does anyone love what they do, curriculum-wise?
We use Catechesis of the Good Shepherd.
Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, that comes up along the way. Folks, I do not know that one well. I hear from folks regularly who like it. Montessori model, okay.
And Jerome studied that. Jerome Meredith studied
Okay.
that to make Godly Play for less time and more Protestant churches. So
Terrific. That is still too high church for our church. We are as low a low church as you can get in our group. I will say the Stories in Wonder and another like 25, on my website, we have moved those into a curriculum model for $5 a Sunday. They come with an editable file, but they are meant to be a baseline for churches that want to write their own. Because again, I'm in my opinion bubble now, okay? I'm in my opinion bubble. I would love for more churches to write their own because you know your kids. You know if your kids need to be moving more or if they can handle doing calm practices. So you know with response spaces, which kinds of things. You know if your kids will want one response question and then be allowed to go back to play, or if they actually can spend a few minutes being quiet. Like, you know your kids. And you know your tone and your culture better than anything. And box curriculum has to write for as wide a reach as possible, especially now for economic sustainability, which often means you don't get a lot unique, right? If you all come from a denominational tradition with really special rituals, like that's never gonna show up. You're gonna have to add that in anyway. So the stuff we have is the idea that it's your baseline to write your own. It's got the paraphrase of the story, like you find in Wonder, and then, like I said, I think we have 75 stories on there now. It's got one game idea, one prayer idea for response, and 3 wonder questions that have no right or wrong answer. With the assumption, and the churches that use it, if they are an art kind of church, y'all know how to go find art. You're great on Pinterest. You go find amazing art ideas. You go make art. If you're a craft kind of church, I don't make crafts. They give me hives. we find some crafts. Most stories have crafts, right? Again, like these are things that a lot of you know how to supplement those pieces based on what your kids need. That's there as well as an option. I like it. That's what we do. But we come from, like our kids, I am now in a very small church. We do Oreo cookie, so free play, story, and back to free play if they're done. We don't try to extend the time beyond their interest. And so it ranges how long we're actually with them, depending on how much they're into what we're up to. And sometimes we do that for the whole time, and sometimes we don't. But that's our version. So they're designed to be like 15, 20 minutes max, because after that, kids would like to be all done, please and thank you. So we don't write more. But I have come from churches where it had to be about 60 minutes solid of programming, because, thank you. Yeah, it's about when they max out, right? 15, 20 minutes, so, yeah. All right, what else, other thoughts? Okay. I am hanging, so if you had other things you do want to talk about, feel free. I do want to ask before you get up and go, I would love to give you just 1 minute of like, we spend an hour and a half working through this. You carry all this in your minds and hearts all the time as practitioners. I would love to give you 1 quiet minute for like, what is your one biggest thing? Like if you're going to filter, like what is your next right step with this for you in your very specific context and with the kids and families you serve? What would be your first next right step if you're going to narrow it down to 1? And I will keep a timer for us for a minute. All right, would you pray with me? So God, I am so deeply grateful for these colleagues that care so much about how kids meet you, and for the work that they put in to create spaces that are safe and exploratory and fun. And so I would ask that as they go from here, you would bless them with resolve, because they know what's good for kids, and that you would bless them with creativity and spark new ideas for things that could be fun and bring scripture to life and create space to meet you. And God, I do want to specifically ask that in our churches and contexts, you would raise up volunteers and parents who want to help make this too, that you would fill the need that we have to do this in a team. So just at a really practical level, would you tend to that with us? And would the kids represented in this room be blessed by these leaders as they get to know you? Would they be blessed with a faith that is based on who you are instead of how they behave or what they believe? Would they be free to know that you love them so deeply and your grace is so vast? And thank you that we get to be carriers of that truth. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank y'all so much.